Distinguished guest. He is a people's mind. He talks about not only human resource, but what contribution people can make, not only to the development of organizations, but the development of countries, and invariably how that can translate into the variables of business, into the spheres of developing enterprises, and ultimately development in countries. He's also a former footballer, though. And that's a good part about it, because we're just coming out of a defeat against the United States of America, for which his own country, the United Kingdom, no, England, they didn't do too well in terms of the scores, but did well on the pitch against their group opponent, Italy. And next they play Uruguay. We'll see how that goes for England, though. I have Michael A. Porter in the studio. Thanks for joining me, Mr. Porter.
Good morning.
How are you? I see that often you come to Ghana to give a lot of talk, not necessarily motivational talk, but good advice to the business people around and to various entities.
Yeah.
Crucially, what would you say is the most important resource in any organization or for any country?
Yeah. Good morning to everybody. I've been coming to Ghana since 2005, and my main reason for coming here is, you know, I'm rolling out in-house management development programs for a number of companies here in Ghana. And I think, to answer your question, I think the most important resource that any organisation would have is people. You're only as good as you're only as good as the people that you have around you. So I think you know, organisations need to look after their people, and you know, people are the most important asset. Having people with the right competence, the right skills, the right abilities is a big plus for any organisation.
I've listened to you before, I guess a couple of months ago. You've been talking about a new matrix you have, or a model you have.
That's right.
For development of people and for organisational development.
Yeah.
What is it, and how does that translate into effective management at the workplace?
Yeah. Well, this model that we've recently put together in conjunction with my Manchester research group, because of course I hail from the city of Manchester in England, is called the People Matrix Management Model. And for those people who work in human resources or in people management, you know, the current model that most professionals are using now is called HR Business Partner Model. This was devised in '94, so we believe that the world has changed since 1994, and so this new model has been rolled out already last 18 months. It's been to countries like Bahrain, it's been to South Africa, it's going to Zimbabwe next month, and it's all about different ways of working in the future. You know, most jobs now are focused very much on project management. You know, a lot of skills required in the workplace require project management skills. So matrix management is an extension of project management. So matrix management, you might be working with people from different parts of the organisation coming together as a group. So this is our model, is focused around that. And the other thing that we're taking into account is something that we call generational psychology. Now, we've done quite a lot of work into what does this mean, generational psychology? Well, if you look at the workplace at the moment, you have up to 5 different generations of people working in the workplace. From the matures, let me give you an example, Tina Turner. From the baby boomers, an example, Barack Obama. Generation X, example, Angelina Jolie. Generation Y, example, Justin Bieber, the Canadian pop singer. And Generation Z, who are not quite ready to go into the workplace yet, Will Smith's daughter. So you can see that the mindset of these 5 different generations is slightly different. You know, Tina Turner would look at things slightly different than Justin Bieber. So the challenge for managers in this day and age is that, you know, managers have to adapt to the different generations that are working with us. You know, in the next 10 to 15 years, 50% of our workforce will come from Generation Y. That's the 20-somethings today. So, of course, we need to adapt ourselves into the new way of working, you know. And this could be a challenge for many organisations.
If you go around developing countries, the needs that developing countries will need to have are different, and especially when there are various variables like perhaps poor illiteracy rates, high growth dependency rates, you also have poor GDP rates, etc. That tends to ultimately influence on how companies tend to perform, how that also tend to reflect on their P&Ls, and overall how that also reflects on whatever strategies they have in developing their HR. How do we get to the point where ultimately companies in developing countries tend to do the same things that will be of standard, but equally also tend to have a certain retrospection to the environment in which they operate?
Well, to a certain extent, you know, the reasons for this is a lot of companies in the so-called developing markets, one could argue that the developing markets are doing better with the so-called mature markets in the world. You know, most of the mature markets have got financial problems at the moment. But a lot of organisations focus very much on the bottom line, on profitability, on, you know, making sure that, you know, cash is king, you know. And to a certain extent, that can have a detrimental effect if you don't invest in your people. You can maybe get away with it for 4 or 5 years, you know, good profits. But the problem is, if you don't invest in your people, you don't recruit the right type of staff, you know, staff who have competence, staff who have the right skills and attitudes to be able to deliver. You know, after a certain amount of time, all of a sudden the organisation will start to creak at the sides. So, you know, profit is very important, but some of that profit needs to be reinvested back into the business to help to develop staff, to help to develop their competencies, you know, and help to develop the organisation forward in the right way. So this is, again, a big challenge for organisations.
There's a book written by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. It's titled The Cost of Civilization. Now, basically, he just tends to reiterate how the middle class in America, which ultimately tend to be the major component of the political class or political elite in America, are also some of the main contributors to the difficulties that economists or such economists all the time face. Now, human beings have insatiable needs. The needs would always be growing. How do we make sure, as countries that tend to have a certain developmental mindset and agenda, we tend to carry entities that will help in that growth? And we're talking about enterprises or companies with that level of development.
Well, I think in any part of the world, you know, whether you're middle class, whether you're a working class, or whether you're high class, you know, at the end of the day, it's about creating wealth, you know, and, you know, individuals, organisations and countries, you know, have a responsibility on them to actually be wealth creators. And I think, you know, here in Ghana, you know, I've been coming to Ghana since 2005. Clearly, you know, Ghana's got some economic problems at the moment, which a lot of countries are facing. It's not just Ghana alone. Everyone's got challenges at the moment. In my country, the UK, you know, the level of taxation has gone higher and higher and higher. You know, it's very difficult for the ordinary man in the street to you know, to make a living anymore, you know, with high taxation. However, you know, there are things that we can do about it. And, you know, sometimes individuals just wait for that job, maybe a job offer that will never come. So what do you do about it? Well, you know, why don't you start to think about maybe setting up your own business, become an entrepreneur, you know, and adding to the GDP of the country, you know, creating wealth, creating opportunities for other people. So I think there's no barriers to this. You know, you don't have to have an MBA from GIMPA to set up your own business. You know, you can be, you know, articulate, you can be business-minded, you can start off small like I did back in 1994 when I left corporate life and I set up my own entity. You know, it was a challenge, it was a risk. You know, you take risks, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But as an entrepreneur, if you've got, or a potential entrepreneur, if you have enough skills in your own abilities and enough belief in yourself, you can do it. And, you know, Nelson Mandela once said, you know, I mean, I believe in stickability. You know, if somebody knocks you down, you stand up again, dust yourself off and carry on, you know, till the next challenge. So, you know, I think to answer the question, there's lots that individuals can do. And I think here in Ghana, you know, there should be more encouragement to encourage, particularly younger people, to be creators of wealth.
So be innovative. And this time you're in Ghana for?
Sorry?
This time you're in Ghana for?
I'm in Ghana well, I arrived 28th of May, seems a long time ago now. I'm here the best part of a month, and in fact I'm due to travel back soon, but I'm thinking of extending my stay. So I've got involved in some football media, some commentary work, and anyway, that's another story. So yeah, so it's my longest stay ever in Ghana, nearly a month.
Usually you're interacting with companies, is that not it? Are you offering training programs?
Yeah, I'm running with companies like this week actually we've you mentioned the people matrix model. The other piece of work that we've just launched globally, because most of my work is global work. I don't spend much time in the UK anymore, is our new mini International MBA. It's not an academic MBA, it's very much a short management programme, and actually CFAO Motors Ghana are going to be the first organisation here to pilot it. It's running Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week, and we're looking forward to rolling that programme out. It's 3 modules of 5 days duration over a period of 9 months, with assignments in between. It's quite challenging, but it's got very much a global focus, an international focus. So we're starting on Wednesday.
Okay.
So I'm excited about that.
People go through, and then what becomes of them?
Well, people go through. We're looking to get this programme accredited by Open College Network. So it's not, it's not a formal academic MBA. It's a high-level management development programme, and it's you get a certificate at the end. So on your CV, it might look good, the fact you've completed the programme, although it's not to be confused with an academic MBA.
Knowledge is critical. These knowledge that individuals will be getting from such programs, and indeed get from other training programs that are convened around the world, how do they ultimately tend to translate into the overall objective of companies or firms?
You're exactly right. I think knowledge is power, to a certain extent, and the more knowledge you have, the more powerful to a certain extent you can become, and the more influential you can become. Here in Ghana, one thing I have noticed, when I run my various programs for various companies, is an eagerness to learn. Delegates on a lot of my programs, they're like sponges. They're eager to take information in, they're eager to learn. There's a high motivational from delegates, and interested in what I have to say, and I think to a certain extent I've travelled. I've probably worked now in around about 50 countries, so when I come to Ghana, I'm not just coming here with a British perspective or an English perspective. I'm talking about what's happening across the world. Some of my experiences are shared through stories. Each story has a learning point. And one of the most fascinating things I find is culture. And I can tell you that around the world, particularly people problems, they're the same. They're the same issues, whether you're in Bangladesh, whether you're in Nigeria, whether you're in South Africa, or whether you're in Sweden. The people issues are the same. What's different is that the way they are dealt with. And what drives the change and what drives is the culture. So it's really down to the culture of the country in terms of what you can do and what you can't do within a particular country. And culture is very important, because it's one of the things that I have to pay respect to. You can't go to a country and say this is the way to do it. There we are. You have to adapt. You have to adapt the style and to the culture of that country. I got asked to speak at Taiwan recently, the capital city, Taipei, part of China, and they asked me, Michael, can you come and tell us all about culture? So I said, okay, I'll come along. And so we did some research, some latest thinking, and I came up with this conclusion that culture has 3 strands. The first strand, as far as I'm concerned, and my research team, is the culture of the country. Ghana has a distinct culture here. Nigeria has its own culture, it's different to Ghana. The US, as we saw last night on the football, have their own culture, their fans. They all behave slightly differently, and so that's the first level of culture. The second level of culture that we alluded to was the fact that, corporate culture. If you work for Joy FM, the culture here is slightly different than, say, City FM. you know, and so, you know, so on and so forth. For those people who work at Unibank, the culture at Standard Chartered Bank will be different to working there. So the second level of culture we alluded to was corporate culture. You know, and the third level and final level of culture we alluded to was individuals, personality. Culture derived through their personality. You know, we all look different, unless we're twins. But even twins have different personalities, you know. So how is our personality formed? Well, through various reasons, through various ways, you know, through our upbringing, our parentage, our interests as young children, our religions, our beliefs, our hobbies and our interests. They all form this personality. And so the third level of culture I distinguished was personality. So when we talk about culture, I think we need to look at the bigger picture. And of course, going back to your earlier question, culture plays an important part in terms of how things are sorted out, how they're developed, how problems are solved. We cannot forget culture. When I first started my global work, I made many mistakes, you know, and a lot of them were cultural. Now I sit back and watch before I act. So
well, it just means that you've gone better. But now you may have traveled to countries around Africa. The point is, countries need people.
Yeah.
They need people to develop. They need people to develop whatever entities that will help the countries develop.
They do.
And those entities also need people to make sure their objectives are met, so to speak. If we get to the point where we'll have to draw a direct linkage to people development and then state policy development of people, how do you make sure, as you go respective countries, so to speak, you tend to draw a linkage between perhaps state policy for people development and then what the people development policy should be for firms and entities?
Yeah, you know,
because if the people don't get to develop well, you don't get the right people in the firms for the country.
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. And you know, if you look at the continent of Africa, and you look at Ghana as a nation, you know, something like nearly 50% of the workforce are under of the population are under the age of about 26, 27, 28. So for the future, you know, Africa in particular, you know, has a high level of talent. We'll call it talent, you know. Now, if you look at the so-called mature economies, you know, the average age of a worker, let's say in the US or in Western Europe, is 45, 46. Here, you're looking at 25, you know, across Africa and across Asia in particular. So therefore, you know, it doesn't take a rocket science to work out that in 20, 30 years' time, maybe some of these so-called mature countries are not going to have enough talent to go around to fill the jobs. And therefore, there may be a requirement to take more people from overseas to actually fill the requirements and jobs. I mean, if you look at India, you know, India as a population, you know, it actually, in the next year or two, it's going to take over China as the most populous country in the world. You know, China has had a restriction on, you know, 1 child per family restriction for a number of years, although it's been lifted. Recently it's gone to 2, but in India there's no restriction. So Indians, you know, if you look in Ghana, when I came to Ghana first in 2005, I saw, you know, a number of Indian nationals, but around in Ghana now there's lots of Indian nationals. And, you know, and Indian nationals, particularly on the IT sector, they're providing an excellent service all over the world. And so, you know, the best talent in India sometimes is handpicked and cherry-picked. And, you know, they're travelling and providing a service globally. So I think it's very important, and coming back to your question, whose responsibility is it? Well, of course, anyone's individual development is a self-responsibility. Yourself, myself, we have a responsibility not only to keep ourselves, you know, to get ourselves qualified in whatever we want to do, but also to keep our skills and knowledge up to date. If we sit back and relax, and, you know, technology is very, as an example, technology, you know, it's a fast-moving area. We cannot afford to sit back on our laurels and say, well, you know, I've got a certificate here, I've got a PhD from the University of wherever, you know, I'm an expert. You know, and you probably are today, but tomorrow, if you're not careful, you could end up being a dinosaur. So I think it's very important that as an individual we keep our skills and knowledge up to date. It's called CPD, Continuing Professional Development. So never sit back on your laurels. From an organisation perspective, yes, I think, you know, here in Ghana you have your National Service Scheme, which is to be applauded. You know, it's giving, you know, younger people the opportunity to spend time working in an organisation, in an entity, in the hope that maybe at the end of the placement they'll find that job that they're looking for. In many cases, though, this isn't the case. You know, hopes are dashed, and at the end of the term, that's it. You're released and you go back into the pool, the talent pool, or whatever you want to call it. To a certain extent, I believe that maybe we're not doing enough to help the young people globally. The under-25s, whether you live in Greece, whether you live in Spain, whether you live in South Africa, Ghana or Nigeria, they've got a rough time at the moment. Got a rough time. And I think we're not doing enough to help our younger people, and these people, of course, in the next 10, 15 years will be fundamental to any country's development. You know, for example, you know, universities and educational establishments have to be realistic. You know, young people coming out of university with their degree certificate or their master's certificate have high expectations. Because they've attained their qualification, they expect to roll into a job. They expect employers to be clambering for their skills. In reality, that's not the case. So, are we doing enough to help our young people today? Should the universities and educational establishments be preparing people to be unemployed rather than preparing people to get a job? If we look at the situation, there's not enough jobs to go around. We have to be realistic. So, are we preparing people to be unemployed? That's the first point. The second point is, are we giving people enough skills, younger people, to become entrepreneurs? Are we encouraging them to start small business? Is there an opportunity for some small finance to get them moving? You know, is the universities doing enough at university to encourage entrepreneurship, for example, creators of wealth? And that's another issue. I haven't all the answers to the questions, but I'm just highlighting some of these things. It's everywhere. It's not just here in Africa or Ghana. It's everywhere. These are the challenges. And then if we look at the government level, you know, different governments are doing different things. In Malaysia, for example, the Malaysian government have provided through each organisation is required to give a percentage of their profit which goes into a fund for training and development, and then they're allowed. It's called PSMB, and the PSMB control the budget, and then individual corporations are allowed to nominate so many members of their staff on training and development, you know, which is high standard. You know, some governments are providing work experience programs. Some governments are providing bursaries to help people to maybe study overseas and things like that. So I think it's a mixture. The individuals have to help themselves. The corporations maybe could do a little bit more. Academia maybe needs to think about you know, what's happening other than getting a job. What other options have young people got, and how can we help? And the governments need to think, well, if we're not careful, we're going to have a whole generation of I will call them feral graduates who for one reason or another, no fault of their own, are unable to find the job of their choice or the work of their choice. So, you know, globally, it's a problem. You know, interestingly, you know, a third of all jobs that are advertised at the moment globally, this is down to local research, are unfilled. And why is that? You know, there's more than enough people on the job market. The problem is that the people applying for the jobs, for one reason or another, don't have enough skills, competency and knowledge to be able to take that
talking about
job.
competency and knowledge and whether people have the skills or not, we're seeing a rising tide of nations that tend to discover some level of natural resource or whatever we want to call it, whether it's oil or whatever mineral that's discovered the next day or the day after. Now, in more developed countries, because of the expertise and the growth of the institutions that do training and education, you tend to find a lot more better skill set of people than in the developing countries.
Yeah.
And in Ghana, we're facing that, especially for our oil and gas.
Yeah.
What should be the idea and the mindset futuristically that, well, it should be more preventive, that you plan before you tend to think, well, the time has come for me to do something?
You know, it's all about succession planning, life to a certain extent. It's all about manpower planning, succession planning, talent management. You know, all these things are very crucial to any nation's development. And therefore, you know, the powers that be, whoever they might be, you know, it's important to think about, you know, the human resource in particular that you have is very valuable. And, you know, what are we going to do with our people? You know, how are we going to develop them? You know, if you look at some of the developed countries, you know, what are they offering? Well, you know, for example, you know, apprenticeships. You know, so whether you're, you know, after you leave high school or whatever, many of these companies now offer apprenticeships. So if you wanted to be a mechanic or a joiner or a carpenter or a electrician or a plumber, you know, you go on to do a proper apprenticeship with 4 years training, and then you get something called your indentures. That means that you're now competent to be a tradesperson. Yeah. And then if you ramp it up even higher, you know, maybe at the graduate level, you know, lots of organisations, and in fact some of the multinationals here in Ghana are already doing this. They're offering graduate development programs, you know, so that as a graduate, a young graduate, you would join a company, and typically you might do 2 years of general training followed by 2 years of more responsible experience. But actually you get very broad brush training, mostly done on the job. And, you know, these training methodologies are very, very beneficial, both to the individual, you know, the organisation and the country. Because why? Because it's creating wealth of skills. It's keeping, you know, for example, in UK at the moment, if you're looking for a plumber or a carpenter, you have great difficulty finding one. And that void has been filled by European nationals coming in from Poland and Romania. You know, they've migrated under the EU rules. They've seen that there's, you know, for maybe 10, 15 years, the UK government stopped apprenticeships. They stopped funding apprenticeships. They stopped encouraging apprenticeships. Only recently have they reintroduced them. So therefore, there's been a massive skill shortage of tradespeople. You know, the entrepreneurs in Poland and Romania and other countries have noticed the gap, and they fill the void. So if you want a plumber or a joiner, you ring somebody up, it's likely to be a Polish worker in the UK.
And you always make up your mind that you're going to get a Polish person or somebody who is from Romania or somewhere else, some new EU entrant.
Absolutely,
Okay.
but actually, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, because most of these people are very, very highly skilled.
We actually
and
get that
hardworking.
from our African brothers and our colleagues who say, well, all our jobs have been taken over by Poles and the Romanians, etc. Now, companies. How do we make sure there's a mix between HR strategy and then what's the overall corporate strategy?
Well, you see, you know, if we look at a corporate level, you know, I always say there's 3 levels of planning, you know, at the corporate level. Of course, you know, you have the business plan for the corporation, you know. The second level would be the departmental plan, you know, the area that you work. And at the individual level, you'd have your performance appraisal and you'd have your target set. Do you have target set? You know, I have target set. And I think, you know, when we look at planning, we look at these 3 levels. But if we look at people planning, of course, you know, the business plan and the manpower plan and the organisational development strategy need to go hand in glove. It's no use having the business plan going that way and the OD strategy going in another direction. Clearly they have to work together. So, you know, it's very important for organisations these days that they have the right sort of plan. You know, going back 10, 15 years ago, it was all about long-term planning, you know, long-term planning, 5 to 10 years. In today's world, it's more short-term. Why? Because, well, maybe you won't be around next year. You know, it's tough, you know. So I think the focus has very much shifted to short-term to medium-term planning. That's all we can do. However, you know, as OD and HR and people professionals, we need to make sure that we've got the right skill mix. We need to make sure we've got the right age group within our workforce. You know, I've noticed a number of companies here have very low retrenchment, you know, which is a good sign that their employees are happy within their job, or maybe, you know, they're better paid than any competitor, or maybe they're frightened to leave because maybe they won't find another job. So there's numerous reasons for that. But saying that, if we're not careful, and those same employees stay with us for 10, 15, 20 years, all of a sudden the average age of your workforce might go from 30-something up to 50-something, and then you've got a problem, you know, because people aren't going to be around forever. So I think, you know, for the larger organisations in particular, it's important that, you know, that the talent pipeline is feeding into the system, you know. Now, whether that be through national service or through apprenticeships or trainee schemes, I don't know, but this is very important.
Okay, so what's the focus now as you're in Ghana for the next how many weeks more?
Well, I'm here for at least another week, and then maybe, as I say, an extension. I have to be in Zimbabwe by the 8th of July, so because I'm off to Victoria Falls speaking at their national conference, the Institute of Personnel Management Zimbabwe. The rest of this week, of course, we've got the mini MBA, and then on Saturday I'm running a public programme at the International Convention Centre entitled Creativity, Innovation and Entrepreneurism, and it's a full-day workshop starting at 9, finishing at 5. And the organisers are an organisation called, I've forgotten the name, but I can maybe give you the contact details. Hero Media. Okay. Hero Media is the name of the organisation. Lawrence Quaffo is the contact. So there's still a few places available if anyone's interested. Okay.
And you've been a former footballer before.
I have.
You still work with players' committees, or what do you call them?
Yeah, you know, my first job, you know, you know, life is all about reinventing yourself, isn't it? And of course, my first job after leaving school, I was lucky enough to be signed on by Bolton Wanderers football team, who then played in the English League Division 1. Of course, that was before the Premiership.
The Championship?
Well, they were in the Premiership up till 2 seasons ago, got relegated at the end of last season.
We all know about Bolton.
You know all about them. And of course, they didn't manage to get back into the Premier League, so they're in the Championship now. We have a new ground, the Reebok Stadium, and we have a very strong former players committee, which I'm part of. So, you know, we do quite a lot of work with charity. We have golf days against Man City, Man United, Liverpool, creates a lot of interest. We do a lot for hospices and children's charities. We have sportsman's dinner every year, and we play, you know, we do all sorts of things. So, you know, I'm very much in my spare time when I'm around heavily involved in Bolton Wanderers former players committee.
Did you watch the match England played against Italy?
I did.
I thought they were marvellous.
Well, you know, as an English fan, since 1966, our aspirations have somewhat, you know, since we won the World Cup back in 1966, you know, our aspirations have gone from celebration down to acceptance. And, you know, when England play Italy, you know, it's always a challenge. It's always a challenge. You know, if Italy get a goal up, you know, it's very difficult to, you know, they shut up shop, basically.
And you're playing Uruguay next?
We're playing Uruguay next on, I believe it's Thursday evening. Luis Suarez, it will be fit and ready for that one. And he'll be looking to prove a point, you know. But we'll see. We'll wait and see what happens. Costa Rica, very surprisingly, beat Uruguay. You know, the World Cup this time is throwing up a lot of, you know, forget history.
Yeah.
You know,
that's people's development,
forget history. It's all people development. It's younger people.
Football is everywhere now.
It's younger people.
It's not only your game.
Yeah. Sometimes the king is dead, long live the king, you know. And if you look at Spain, you know, who'd have thought the Netherlands, who a good side, would put 5, and it should have been 6 or 7, with all due respect, against the team that have been riding on the crest of the wave for the last 6 years. Who'd have thought that would have happened? So yeah, it's throwing up a lot of interest, isn't it?
Yes, it has. Okay, so have a good day, and we also hope that you enjoy your time in Ghana. Michael A. Porter, We've been having Michael, a human development person, somebody who has a lot of interest and experience in developing people for companies and speaking to companies about how they also need to develop entrepreneurship and all the aspects of business. And he will be in Ghana for another week or two. I know that if you're a company, get in touch with him. That's the best linkage you can ever have for the next 2 quarters of the year. Thank you very much, Mr. Porter.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.